So today's video is going to be about tissue. Remember, a tissue is multiple cells that work together for a function. And we're going to learn the four main types. And this is pretty much a video for lecture and lab. The main differences in lab, you're going to be looking at some histology, which is looking at the tissue under the microscopes. And for your practical, you'll have to identify looking at microscopic pictures. On lecture, we won't do that. It'll be more about general shapes and functions, etc. But the video will hold true for both lecture and lab. So this video is just an overview of the four main types, and then we're going to do just epithelial on this video. Alright, so the four main types, the first one is an epithelial tissue, and then we've got muscle tissue, we have nervous tissue, and you have connective tissue. If you need to stop and pause the video as you write those down, this video will be over epithelial tissue. So the functions of epithelial tissue, and probably the main function, is protection. It is a protective layer, single layer or multiple layers, depending on what type of epithelial tissue that we're looking at. We're going to see some are going to have some secretion properties. Some of our tissue have specialized cells in them, such as goblet cells that secrete mucus. And so we're going to see secretion. And then we're going to see in some parts of our body, we see some absorption, such as in your small intestine. These epithelial tissue will help absorb some of the nutrients that you will need. And so this is just a nice little overview of because some of the characteristics of epithelial tissue is at first it does line. So think of like a shelf liner, etc. Why do you put shelf liners on shelves like at your house, etc.? It's for protection. So we're going to see that this is a lining tissue. It lines our GI tract, hollow tubes, and our skin. So anything that would be exposed to an opening, it always lines an opening of some sort. So a tube or a hollow organ or a skin. So they are going to be closely packed together to form these sheets. Some are just one cell thick and some are multiple cells thick. They have something called a basement membrane. That's something important for us to see in lab, so we'll know when one tissue type starts and when this tissue ends. And we'll look at that here in just a second. And then they are avascular, which means they have no blood supply. Anytime you put an A in front of a word, that means not. Vascular means has to do with your cardiovascular system, so no blood supply. But they are living cells that are there together, so how would they get their nutrients? They do get their nutrients through diffusion. So the blood supply is lower, and the nutrients will just diffuse up to the epithelial area. So that's kind of important for us to know. So I just want to show you what a basement membrane is, and do want you to kind of know a couple of words. In fact, this is the prettier picture. I'm going to draw a picture. I don't draw as pretty a picture, so let me go to a blank page. And then I'm just going to draw with you here. So I'm just going to draw some epithelial. I'm just going to draw cuboidal because that's just easier. And again, I don't draw well. And we'll just put some nuclei in there so we can kind of see. And so if this was the opening that it was facing, this side here is called the apical side. I would like you to know the apical side always faces the opening. And I just have a single cell here. So then we'll make a deeper line here. This is known as the basement membrane. So the apical surface or apical side and the basement membrane, also known as the basal side, basal, because we're going to see some cells. So the bottom of the cells is the basement membrane or basal surface, and the top is the apical. Because there's going to be times where it's going to line a hollow tube, such as your digestive tract. And so in the middle of this tube here, this is known as your lumen. Lumen would be the center of the tube. I do want you to know that word as well. And so if we had some cells here, we'll put some nuclei in there. So these are some cells that are surrounding this opening. So this is the opening. So in a tube, the apical side is actually right there. This is the apical side. Why is that the apical side? Because this is going to be the opening, and then our basement membrane is going to be here. So this would be the basement membrane or basal surface. And we're going to be looking at that. And the reason that's important is we're going to see a hot mess underneath the basement membrane, and that's always going to be connective tissue. I'm just going to put CT. And so here, outside here, we're going to see all this craziness going on. This is going to be connective tissue land. So when you're looking under the microscope, you know, oh, I don't want to look under the basement membrane to look. I want to look towards the opening there. All right, now we're back at our pretty picture. And so you can see here's the apical side or apical surface. This is the epithelial tissue. Here's our basement membrane, which is still epithelial tissue. And then down here is the hot mess I call the connective tissue land. So when we're looking under the microscope, that's going to help us be able to see when we transition from one tissue type to the other. So let's start talking about each tissue type. First thing you have to understand about epithelial tissue is it's named in two ways. It's first named on whether it is just one cell layer or multiple cell layers. So our first word is that. So if we just have one cell layer, it's called simple. If we have multiple cell layers, it's called stratified. So first thing we'll decide is if it's one cell layer or multiple cell layers, and that's going to determine whether it's simple or stratified. Our second is whether it's shape. So if it looks kind of flat, it's called squamous. So if it is one cell layer flat, it's going to be called simple squamous. If it's one cell layer and it looks more like a cube, it's going to be called simple cuboidal. That is what I drew a while ago. I drew a simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. And if it's more of a column shape, really long and skinny here, it's going to be called simple columnar. If you got multiple cube shapes, it's going to be called stratified, squamous, stratified, cuboidal, stratified, columnar. So this next slide does a good job of overview. And so on your thing, if you want to draw these pictures, that is absolutely fine because it shows drawing. For you guys in lab, you're going to want to kind of maybe draw some of the way the histology looks to you. So here is a simple squamous. Here's a stratified squamous, a simple cuboidal, more of a stratified cuboidal. Here is a simple columnar. See those nuclei are all lined up here. Here is more of a stratified columnar. I don't know that this one and this one really exist, so we really won't concentrate on these two. And then you've got something called a pseudostratified columnar. And so for lab purposes, do you see these little brisk-like things? That's cilia. Cilia, those little whisker-like things. So our pseudostratified columnar epithelial is going to have the cilia here. The reason it's called a pseudostratified, we'll look at it in a minute, is because it looks like it's more than one layer, but it's actually not. There's only one cell going from the apical side down to the basement membrane.